Views on this program are opinions of dental industry experts and not necessarily those of dentist advisors. Opinions shared in the following interview do not constitute personal financial advice. This program is furnished by Dentist Advisors, a registered investment advisor. You're tuned into Dentist Money Industry Expert Series. Now here's your host, Reese Harper.
Welcome to the Dentist Money Show. I'm your host, Reese Harper, here with a special guest today, Dr. Richard Engar. He's somebody who's got a resume that's probably as diverse and varied as you'll see as a dentist. Welcome to the program, Dr. Engar.
Thank you.
We've got a really good show planned today for you. We're going to be talking about part of his background, which is the CEO of the Professional Insurance Exchange. And that's a malpractice insurer that helps protect dentists from situations that they get in with patient claims and a variety of other issues. So I want to give you a little bit of background on Dr. Engar, and then we're going to get into areas of concern that from an insurance company's perspective, what they see on a daily, weekly, annual basis in terms of claims, how claims arise, the likelihood of various claims, and how an insurance company is run. There's some really interesting insights that I think will help everyone in their practices and in their finances. All of you know that one of our kind of hot topics is helping protect your estate and protect your wealth, and you work so hard to accumulate it. You want to make sure that nothing can poke holes in your financial plan. So tell me a little bit about how PIIE started and why it was organized.
Well, in the late 70s, there were some issues going on with the national companies in terms of premium increases. At that point, they were beginning to see more of an interest in plaintiffs' lawyers to pursue malpractice claims among dentists, and the national carriers started increasing their rates dramatically. And dentists felt that their needs weren't met. They weren't listened to, that the cases were being settled and adjusters were making decisions without any input from the dentists. And so this movement started really in California to look into dentists controlling their own destiny and running their own companies. And a number of visionary dentists, one of whom was Dr. Charlie Parkin, had this notion that we should maybe think about doing this in Utah. So they sent a dentist out there to meet with some California dentists
who had already established something similar?
We're working on the same sort of thing.
Okay.
The California company became TDIC, and PIIE started out in September of 1978.
Yeah, so the general big picture was premiums are increasing all over. Dentists are frustrated that the insurance companies are settling claims sometimes based on what an adjuster's rule book says and maybe not applying a lot of logic or putting effort into protecting the needs of the dentist.
Right on the money. I mean, you're talking companies where the dental malpractice part was just a real small division.
Yeah.
And their whole thing was it's a lot more expensive to fight a claim and go to trial than it is just to settle up front quickly. And so, the feeling was let's control our own destiny.
What's the average number of claims that happen in a calendar year usually?
Well, and that's another excellent question because it's evolved. When I first started at PIIE, we'd probably open 24 to 30 claims a year.
Okay.
And the last few years, it's been under 15.
I don't want to jump ahead, but you're kind of alluding to probably how claims change over time depending on what the perceived how consumers perceive the carrier's strength, right?
Well,
if you're going to settle every case,
word gets around, with the plaintiff's lawyer population in particular, but and I get more telephone calls than that. I mean, we have a lot more what I would call potential claims, where, for example, a dentist will call me and say, I did a root canal and I broke a file, or we had a short fill and the tooth never healed, and I'm referring the patient to an endodontist, and the patient's mad because they don't want to pay for it twice.
Yeah.
And I had them sign an informed consent and everything, and we can look at it and say, well, technically, we could defend this case, but, if all they want is a $900 refund, it might be in your best interest. We haven't signed a release of claims, which means, number one, they can't go to any legal mechanisms after that. And the big one is we have a gag order on there, so they can't go to social media or anything else and try to trash the dentist with a bad review or whatever. So there's a confidentiality clause in there.
And so you're saying in that case, let's say I break a file and I've got the patient's upset about $900 or $2,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
You might say it's not worth filing a formal claim over?
Well, generally, I'm not dealing directly with the patients. Occasionally that happens, but the dentist will usually...
I mean, to the dentist, what advice you giving a guy in that situation?
Well, we can throw all the options out at them. Some of these patients, I'm going to call my lawyer, and the truth is very few of them really have a lawyer, and I'll get into kind of the history and how things have evolved actually into favor of dentists, but we'll just talk about the options. And a lot of the dentists say, look, I don't want to have this be a claim. I don't want to have a hassle. I just as soon give them their money and have them sign the paper and be done.
Yeah.
And so I've probably got almost 50 different variants of these release forms. Because some we have a patient termination clause, some it's for a minor, some the money's going to an endodontist.
You're just providing assistance to the doctor in this case so that he can settle this himself.
Exactly, and then they just meet with the patient. And most patients are happy to sign the form. They get their check, and in a lot of cases, the dentist-patient relationship can continue.
Yeah, because they feel like there's some trust there because they didn't get hosed, right?
Yeah, exactly. Nobody wants to pay for something twice, and this way, the dentist kind of learns a lesson. Maybe the tooth had a curved canal, and of course, sometimes the dentist will want to refer in the patient. Oh no, I know, doc, you can do it. Come on,
yeah.
And the dentist sort of, oh well, I can do it. And it's endodontics is one of those things where it's pretty technique sensitive, and a lot of bad things can happen.
Yeah, you probably see a fair amount of do claims arise a lot from that area or not?
Well, potential claims.
Yeah.
We got a couple going on right now that have involved complications from root canal therapy, and I had more in the past than we do now.
The things we're talking about right now, though, are these considered formal claims, even though they're settled outside of the insurance carrier?
Oh no.
Yeah.
These aren't reportable to anybody, and that's the beauty of it.
Now, would they, in some cases, though, if your carrier knew about this and you had called in and discussed it with them, would they report this on your record at all?
No.
What did you mean earlier when you said when people call into their carrier and they say that they might report that as a claim?
Okay, well, for example, and let's just say there's a carrier out there called XYZ. Okay. You call XYZ, their adjuster. Here's a classic example because I know this happened. Sometimes a patient will swallow an instrument. You're doing a little, a wrench to screw an implant abutment into place or something. These little small things, and you don't often use a barrier to keep people from swallowing stuff. So you slip, it comes out of your hands, patient swallows it. And usually, what do you do in that situation? If you know they swallowed it, it's no big deal. It usually passes through and everything's fine. But once in a while, you'll have to send the patient to their physician or to the ER to get an X-ray. To make sure mainly it's not aspirated. If it gets in the lungs, it's a more serious situation. You got to get it out of there. And normally when that happens, you can tell people are coughing. Lungs don't like metal objects or whatever floating around in them. But, let's say you call XYZ and report the situation, then, the adjuster might know what to do. And some of them have some retired dentist in New York that they could maybe get a hold of. But a lot of them, it's just kind of up to the adjuster.
Okay, so you're not getting a competent resource. And that was kind of one of the points you're making.
Well, and that's one of the big advantages of a company like PIIE or TDIC or any of these dentist-run companies. You've got a resource right there or several resources. TDIC is probably 15 times bigger than we are.
Just because of the size of the market.
15,000 insured in California. So they've got probably a cadre of dentists that you could call. But in any event, the XYZ will then make a note saying, okay, and you've got a claim on your record. Where I advise the dentist, and I keep a record of what we call potential claims because the insurance department makes me do it for whatever reason. The main thing I would like to try to do, just because I advise a dentist, does not mean it's a claim.
Yeah.
If I'll just tell you what our parameters are. We have two.
I think that's a misunderstood value of a dentist-run carrier over a national provider. Is you can get. It's very difficult for someone to your own attorney or your own peers or any other advisor you have. They're not going to know how to give you feedback around a claims-related incident. And if you get an adjuster that's getting paid $15 an hour to process a claim, at some point you're just not going to get good counsel or guidance. And I doubt you're going to get to the level of direction that you guys are providing. I mean, you've got a whole library of forms and an inventory of advice you can provide to make sure that people know how to take care of this stuff outside of a claim situation. Anyway, we can jump to claims too, but these are kind of the non-claims issues I think are interesting, because I think this is probably more common than a claim.
Well, and as I said, most dentists are really worried about having a claim on their record that they have to report from then on. And so the idea of this whole thing is to make the patient happy. It's just a piece of paper, and they send me a copy. I keep a record of it. They keep a record of it, and life goes on. As opposed to having a bona fide claim. No, if I open a claim, it means I have a claim file. Generally, we get our lawyers involved, and it can drag on for 2-3 years.
So when is it a dollar amount, or is it a potential liability issue that would lead you to say this has got to be a claim we have to report? I mean, when do you have to legally as a carrier say this is a claim versus this is something I can advise my our member on?
Well, that's a good question. The answer is it's pretty arbitrary. It's up to the insurance carrier. My rule is if I get what's called a notice of intent, which is a statutory requirement for malpractice claims in Utah, it's a letter that a dentist will get from a lawyer that says, I'm representing so-and-so and they intend to sue you. Okay. So if I get that, then I open a claim.
Okay,
the other thing that'll sometimes, number 2, I talked about swallowing a root canal file or swallowing
any instrument.
Any instrument. We had a situation a couple of years ago where a patient swallowed, I think it was just a little wrench thing to seat an abutment crown. Well, the dentist sent the patient wisely to the emergency room, and they just completely overreacted and thought, it was like a partial denture, some big, huge thing. And so they admitted the patient, and then they, I think, went in after it and pulled it out of there with endoscopy or something. So it generated out of pocket several $1,000s worth of bills.
Yeah.
Well, the patient didn't really want to have to pay those bills.
Yeah.
And so the dentist, if it was $500, $600, $700, $800, he could have handled it. It was getting to the point where he thought, I pay my premiums. I'd like you to handle it.
Yeah.
So the minute we made the determination that I was going to pay it for him, then it became a claim. Okay. So that's the second criterion. So in other words, I get the notice of intent, and those are our rules, and I've tried to make it such, again, that I'm not penalizing our dentist by opening a claim I really don't have to open.
Yeah.
And in that case, we had the patient sign a release, and he got reimbursed, and that was that. And again, a lot of insurance companies, you pay an extra premium for what's called either a hammer clause, or it means they won't settle a claim without your approval as the insured. We don't have that, but in our 30-some, almost 40-year history, we have never settled a claim over a dentist objection.
Okay.
Normally, we'll lay out the issues, what's going on, and in this day and age, we don't have as many claims, but most of them, pun intended, have a little teeth to them. In other words, there is a problem, and the plaintiff's lawyers know that, and so they're a little harder to defend, but at the same time, these plaintiffs' lawyers will come up with these ridiculous amounts they want to settle the cases for. So we'll fight them, and there's other situations where we think the case would be easy to fight, we'd like to go to trial, but for financial reasons, if you have trial, you're out of your office for a week.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have other things there. These things take time and effort, and they wear on you. And sometimes the dentist will just tell me, I don't want to put up with this. I can't sleep. Yeah. Can you just wrap this thing up? Can you settle it?
Yeah.
And so we'll make an effort to settle it for basically, as low as we can. But at the same time, we have to be reasonable. And there are certain formulas and things that apply in the legal world. What is a case worth? One of them is we have something called special damages. Let's say to fix the wrong, it costs $5,000. Well, there's a rule that you treble those, so that's $15,000 for attorneys and quote-unquote pain and suffering and whatnot. So that's a $20,000 settlement.
Yeah.
If they want $100,000 and it should be settled for $20,000, then I'm going to fight it for $20,000. And we can mediate cases. There's some really excellent mediators out there who bring things down to reality. So
just backing up a little bit, I don't know if people realize the process really involved here on the back end. If I have a patient that goes and grabs their attorney and says, I'm going to file a suit against my doctor, and they send you this letter, a claim's got to be opened. You guys have a law firm that you retain.
Yes.
And that law firm's job is to fight the claim and try to get it to where they feel like it's more reasonable, or it's defending the doctor's best interest or PIE's best interest ultimately as well.
Correct.
And I don't know if people realize that that's the process that an insurance company goes through sometimes when a claim is opened, because a lot of times it's not, right? If you just you can have a claims adjuster that just gets a claim, and they have a rule book, several guidelines that they're following to say, this is what we do for this, and we settle at this, or we pay this much, and that's a little bit different than maybe the approach that you've taken.
Well, and we could go beyond that. I mean, initially, I'll get the letter, then the dentist will notify me, and of course the policy requires immediate notification. Then I'll review the records. I get a copy of the records, whether they're digital, which most dentists are going to now, paperless, or the paper copies. I'll review them, and then I'll discuss any questions I have with the dentist, either by phone, email, or a face-to-face meeting. And then I have the luxury of access to faculty at the dental school, potential expert witnesses that'll look at things for me and give me some input there. So right off the bat, I've got people that'll tell me, yeah, I can testify under oath that your dentist met the standard of care. There's no malpractice here. Yeah. So going in early, I've got my ducks lined up.
You got your expert witness. You've got a law firm on retainer that you have a good relationship with. I mean, you guys are in a strong position to defend against a frivolous claim, especially.
Yes, especially with local experts, because most of the plaintiffs bring in these hired guns who are just, they're on expertpages.com or whatever you want to call it, where they can just get a name for somebody and then they can retain them, and they'll say anything for money. I won't say what we call them. You get the drift. But anyway, so we've got everything pretty much set. And then the way the law works is I can review the situation, then I'll send the plaintiff's lawyer a letter denying liability saying we're going to fight this one. And in many cases, that's all it takes. The claim's gone. But then if they're going to pursue it, then the dentist gets what's called a summons and complaint, which is either served or I accept service on their behalf, and then we turn it over to our lawyers. Knock on wood, the only we've lost one trial, and that's because the dentist altered the records.
Oh, really?
And so the jury picked up right up on that. There was no credibility. You can't win a case if you alter records. So if you ask for my advice, number one to dentists and your clients is, if you want to keep your assets solid and not put yourself at risk, do not alter your records under any circumstances. Bang, bang, bang.
Man, let's talk about some of the most common claims that have been filed over the 30 plus 40 years that PIE's been around, and maybe not just within the state, but I'm sure you review other states' claims history. And
right.
What are some of if we had to just kind of list top three or something, what kind of comes to mind?
Well, maybe what I can focus on, there are the issue, whenever I look at a claim, it's sort of like what kind generate the largest settlements or have the most potential for risk. And in the case of your clients, where are their assets put at risk? And the most expensive ones generally have to do with either sedation or some form of oral surgery. The sedation ones, if you over-sedate somebody and obviously have a wrongful death case, those they want policy limits. You're talking $1 million and beyond. The worst case scenario is you sedate somebody and they live, but they're brain damaged the rest of their life. And knock on wood, we haven't had one of those. But we have dealt with a number of wrongful death cases over the years. Not a lot. In the olden days, most of our oral surgery claims were based on third molar extraction complications. Most dentists know about the inferior alveolar nerve, and that can be compressed or cut or somehow damaged, and it's like now your lip's permanently numb. Patients don't like that. The worst paresthesia case we've ever had along that line was a bilateral tongue paresthesia. So now the patient's whole tongue is numb the rest of their life. Now, you don't lose your sense of taste, but the patients think so. That was an expensive claim several years ago.
And those are typically going to be triggered by oral surgery or extractions, and that's where you'll typically see those claims rise.
Correct. And, one of the standard unfortunate situations is where the dentist wants to refer the patient to an oral surgeon, and again, the patient says, oh, come on, doc, I know you can do it, and for whatever reason. And you can usually tell beforehand where you're going to have a problem. Another complication is a fractured jaw. In other words, the wisdom tooth takes up quite a bit of space, and you have to remove bone to get to it. So by the time you're done with that, there's not a whole lot of bone left in that intact mandible. And Usually you don't break it then. The patient goes home and bites down on something when they're no longer numb, and crack.
Yeah.
And we were getting a parade of those for a while. Nowadays, they've been replaced by implant-related claims, mainly having to do, again, with that inferior alveolar nerve. If you hit that nerve with an implant or, again, compress it, the patient's going to have a numb lip.
Yeah.
And there's ways of dealing with that. And another problem is in the upper area, in the back, you have this maxillary sinus, and you can intrude an implant into that either through perforation or putting an implant in too soon, and you can get a sinus infection that's pretty serious.
Yeah.
And probably another one we get often, which is less damages in terms of potential expense, has to do with cosmetic dentistry or extensive crown and bridge work. So a patient comes in and the dentist does several crowns or bridges or whatnot on the patient, or implant retained crown and bridge work, and for whatever reason it's not done well, there's margin issues, the fit isn't totally adequate, the bite isn't right, and those can be expensive cases because to repair them can be $30,000, $40,000 in your just special damages I mentioned. So you tack on the pain and suffering and all that. Those
Anything
can
punitive.
be $100,000 claims.
So let's back up to the kind of biggest ticket items here. How in the United States every year, how many, or maybe it's every 5 years, or I don't know what the statistics are, but how many wrongful death claims do we see in dentistry nationwide?
Well, there have been several involving sedation and particularly children over the last several years, and those are blasted all over. And
so has that been primarily pediatrics? Have you seen?
Most of the ones that are publicized are pediatric cases, and again, the question is, well, how much training did the dentist have?
What if it was a general dentist working in pediatrics? Does the plaintiff's attorney get a little more aggressive in that situation?
Yes, because naturally they'll say, well, why wasn't this case done in the hospital by a specialist?
Specialist, yeah. And so, can those depending on the person, could the plaintiff bring a case that exceeded a normal human life value and say, look, this person was the son of this person who was a very powerful family, and he had big expectations for his life. And
they can certainly try. The standard there is the plaintiffs will get an economist who will come up with all these numbers, and we've dealt with some wrongful death claims and just some issues in general where they can get these economists come up with pretty ridiculous,
pretty high
numbers.
human
We're talking
life values.
$2-3 million, and of course, most insurance companies, the standard policy limit forever has been $1 million per claim, $3 million aggregate limit. Now, some states, for whatever reason, have gone higher. The most litigious states are East Coast, Florida, Washington, D.C., Virginia, Appalachia, if you can imagine, and California, and now Nevada. And you can get, I think, $3 million limits there.
Per claim.
I think I mentioned, our average standard mature claims rate premium is $1,050 a year. Okay, oral surgeons are paying about $10,000 a year. If you're a dental anesthesiologist, it's the same, about $10,000 a year. So our insured get a deal, but at the same time, and if we want to talk a little bit about this, what protections are in place in case a dentist and one of your clients or somebody where you're trying to protect their wealth, what protections are indeed in place? Are $1 million limits adequate? Yeah, which is a good question.
Well, let's this is we've got a lot of information that we just went over right there for you. This is probably just easy in your head, okay?
Well, let's break it down.
Backing up to $1 million, $3 million, what that means. So when I have $1 million per occurrence, that means any one event I can have insurance up to $1 million.
Correct.
$3 million aggregate means
in a year.
Some people I think confuse that when they see aggregate to per occurrence. They think, well, I might have a patient bring two different lawsuits in one situation. So, I might have this, I'm going after this problem and I'm going to sue you for this problem. Per occurrence is one person. Yeah, it would involve three different people making and having three independent
cases where you had to pay out $1 million a piece. And that's why I say it. What's the reality of that? You basically have to have 3 deaths or really serious complications.
And since your whole pool has had 3 claims year to date, it's very unlikely that one person would have 3 claims in a calendar year.
Well, what happened?
Have you ever seen that?
We had a situation. You can get multiple claims against one insured in a year. We had a situation many, many years ago in the 90s where a dentist did all sorts of bad dentistry and surrendered his license. And rather than having patients having to deal with 300 potential claims, I mean, most of our dentists, when we did a mandatory course a few years ago, and a lot of the examples of this dentist work were shown. Bad margins, bad root canals. I mean, I could show you as a non-dentist some x-rays, and you could recognize something there doesn't look right. So we came up with a system, whereas instead of these patients making claims, we had dentists send us basically an x-ray showing the problem, what was going to need to fix it, and then the patients would sign a release and we'd pay the fees to get it fixed. So, these were adding up, and even with that, it never exceeded the aggregate limit. In those days, our limit was only $100,000 per claim, but we still, with all this, didn't exceed that $300,000 limit for a given year. But see, we add all these up, it was pretty substantial. But that's what I mean by an aggregate limit. It wouldn't just be 3. It would say you could have the same person, dentist, could have 15 claims. But it just means all total, the cap would be at $3 million. So if it got to $3,100,000, then that's it. So we'd say, well, but in reality,
so you could have 30 claims for $100,000 each, and you'd hit your $3 million. Or you could have one. You could have 3 total of $1 million. You can't have one for $3 million. That's what the $1 million limit is.
The $1 million per claim. And there was a case in Texas where I think there was fraud and all sorts of things happening, and one of our competitors got hit with, like you say, it was several claims above and beyond the aggregate limit. And I'm not sure how it was handled, but that was one of these where I think there was some bad crown and bridge done and fraud, and there were so many patients that they took a big hit. Interesting.
So let's talk a little bit. I don't think people really understand the difference between insurance and reinsurance.
Right.
And I think that's not a real common thing to understand. So basically, from a normal person's perspective, a bank or an insurance company, they have to have a certain amount of money liquid, there, in order to justify the amount of policies they have. If I've got, let's say I've got $10 million in policies out there, I've got to have a certain percentage in cash sitting in my bank.
Correct.
And generally, in my experience, that range is somewhere between 7 and 10 or 12%, depending on the state they're in and how big they are.
Right.
Isn't that kind of generally the case?
Yeah. Well, for example, if PIIE wanted to have the $1 million limits just on our own, then
meaning you guys would pay the whole claim on your own without the help from any what we call reinsurer.
Correct.
A reinsurer is another insurance company that backs you up.
Correct.
In the case it exceeds what you guys are going to cover yourselves.
Right. Basically, I'll try to put it in terms of simple math. If for the insurance department rule, let's say if PIIE wanted to have no reinsurer, for me to pay $1 million claim, I would have to have $10 million in reserve.
Yeah.
Okay, and that basically, is over and above, and PIIE's to the point where we're getting there, but at the same time, there's less risk to us, and we can charge a lower premium to bring in what's called a reinsurer, which is a large company. We use one called Gen Re, or General Reinsurance, which is a Warren Buffett company. It's probably one of the most solid, secure, highly rated reinsurers there is. So let's just, for simple numbers, I would be responsible for the first $200,000 out of any claim that we would have to pay. And let's say we had $1 million wrongful death claim that we settled, and so we're having to pay. And again, I'm doing it. Let's say the concern was it was a lawyer with 5 kids, and we were afraid, man, this could be $3 million. So we make a settlement to protect the dentist. But then to protect us, see, I'm out $200,000. The reinsurer coughs up the $800,000.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that help. I think that's important for people to understand too. That that helps bring your premiums down at some level as well. Because if PIIE has to expose themselves to the entire amount of risk, that could be coming from one potential bad claim.
Right.
If you have one bad claim in a calendar year that just happens to be 3 independent $1 million tickets for one insured, I mean, that costs the insurer more than $3 million in some cases, right?
Well, sure. Well, it would cost us. I mean, there's legal fees above and beyond that. I mean, a case like that if we were looking at that kind of situation, we'd probably either lost at trial or have some real problems. But the other thing is protecting our insured, and let's say protecting your clients. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go in there.
And almost every carrier, just so everyone knows too, every carrier at some level carries reinsurance. Most of them do. There are very few carriers that do not. Even the largest carriers in the company, whether they're whether life insurance or disability or homeowners, I mean, they're not the only insurance company that's backing up your claim, and so part of your premium just goes to pay for that reinsurance.
It makes financial sense. I mean, like I say, why should I put $3 million of my money at risk when I can, for $218, each of our insured takes care of that? And so the worst case scenario, I'm out $600,000. It sounds like a lot of money, but that wouldn't kill us. We'd go, shoot, life goes on. And I'll tell you something else that I think helps your clients in terms of risk management is there's been a trend lately that plaintiffs' lawyers have realized that it's expensive to pursue malpractice claims, and there's a lot of risk involved. And most of them get paid on contingency. And if I were to throw out the question, most of your clients wouldn't know what percentage the lawyers get. You have a law firm right next to you we're dealing with right now. But if a lawyer gets a settlement or a judgment, they get a third of it. Well, lost dental claims aren't like medical claims. Lost baby, or a bad, some baby's born with a complication and they think it's going to be $3 million to take care of them, blah, blah, blah. They're putting in the same amount of work because all the rules apply, but the return is minimal. I mean, you may be lucky to get $25,000 in a settlement. Well, they're going to get their, $8,000. And they've spent almost that much with experts and this and that. They don't want to mess with it. And so we're seeing fewer and fewer claims because the plaintiff's lawyers are less likely to want to go
on contingency.
So we're seeing that across the board, and that's been a good trend.
Last question on this financial side would be, what if I have a bunch of reserves and my reserves are getting to be real comfortable? How do you guys make your decisions on how to derive premiums? Because a new person probably doesn't pay the same rate as someone who's been there for 20 years or and had no claims, or is everyone on a similar premium schedule? Well,
we actually developed a really discounted premium schedule for these brand new dentists because they're so far in debt. And our competitors have been doing a similar thing, so we had to react. But we have our claims reviewed by these actuaries, which are these mathematicians who determine how well we can.
Do you do it by age, or do you do it by?
Well, the tenure. The industry standard is what's called a claims-made policy, where the premium starts out relatively low. Normally, our premium starts out for the non-new folks at $850, and then it peaks every year. It goes up to year 5, so it's based on tenure, not on age of the dentist.
Great.
And that continues on. And we have if you have your hygienist give local anesthetics, it's $50 more. If you do IV sedation or oral sedation with a drug called triazolam, which is called Halcyon, is the trade name for it. But it's a nice sedative that just relaxes people and doesn't knock them out, but makes the procedure easier. They pay an extra $200. So the most any of our people pays is $1,300 a year now. What we do, though, is if let's say an insured puts an implant where they shouldn't and doesn't handle it properly, and that's considered a meritorious claim, we have a rule that once it's all said and done, for 4 years, they pay 10% of what our settlement was. So if I have to settle a claim, say, for $20,000, that insured, our board of directors makes a determination that it was meritorious, so they pay 10% of that. So they're going to pay
just tack it onto their premium,
$2,000 extra for 4 years as a reminder. Be
careful.
If you have a second one of those, you're out. So that's how we protect the pool. So if, for example, the dentist who altered his records, he was out. We're not going to put up with that.
Well, what would the advice be that you'd give to dentists? Maybe one or two things just to leave our audience with advice you'd give them about malpractice claims and how to avoid them.
Well, one of the big things is just to inform patients of what's going on and, make sure the risks are known. That's through informed consent, but also through dialogue with the patients. And a lot of offices will have the assistants do a lot of that. But the important thing is to treat a friend. And that's hard when it's a brand new patient. But number one, again, is to just make sure patients are informed. Informed patients are happy patients. And we like to try to teach dentists to use a line that we're a high-tech office. So one of the things about being high-tech is having happy, informed patients. And And you can use x-rays and visual aids. And then I think number two is to keep the lines of communication open, because what makes patients mad is that they think they're being ignored or not taken care of, particularly in a situation where the chips are down or there's pain involved.
Yeah.
And I think some dentists are a little too dependent on staff. A lot of dentists, if they're having a surgical procedure done, they call the patient that evening, see how they're doing. And they don't have the staff do it, they do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is just building rapport, and if there's a complication, being able to deal with it. And then, my other fatherly advice, it's not risk management just as much as taking the long view and looking at the future. In other words, you want to have a goal of how long do you want to practice and what kind of dentist do you want to be, and what procedures do you enjoy doing and what procedures are you good at. And those are the things you should focus on and emphasize, and look for, as much as you can do to reduce your loan payments by refinancing so you're getting a lower interest rate. My son just did that with his loans as an anesthesiologist, and it's saving him a grundle, and I'm sure you advise your clients. And then also, as early as you can, start saving for the future.
Yeah.
So
that's great advice, Dr. Engar. We appreciate you taking the time today. It was a pretty insightful thing, and I bet half of you were a little bit lost during some of that, but you think that it's a technical subject that I really enjoy, and I hope that the majority of you are able to take away what I feel like is a really, really important conversation about risk management, how an insurance company functions, and I think that PIIE provides a really good model for how this can be handled in a way that's doctor friendly. It's also cost competitive, and it's nimble and lean, and I think that's an important element of any insurance company. I wish we saw that more than we do in the U.S. right now. So thanks again, Dr. Engar.
Thank you, Reese. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's an enlightening conversation. We'll have you back again soon.